Have you ever known someone who had a knack for success?
Yes.
Yes.
Turn it down.
Yes.
I'm not that person, and I speak to you today not as Wayne Dwyer or an inspirational speaker, not as a desperational speaker either, though. I do have a kind of opposite knack, and that's why, you know, there's a Tao of everything. If you find the right shelf in a bookstore, that's why I speak to you today, the Tao of failure. A little different take on that. This is not something new for me. I don't know if it's me or my way of being me, but in any case, it's been me for a long time. As a matter of fact, I was looking back in preparation for today's sermon, and I thought, you know what? I've been giving sermons for 20 years or more. And one of the ones I did really early on seemed just right. So I'm going to go back to my notes in the first part of my sermon today, my notes from almost 20 years ago, when a great friend of mine that I believe Jack knows, Billy Thomas, who had taught with me at Jacksonville University, was scheduled to do a sermon called The Success of Failure According to the Tao. He got fogged in and couldn't fly to Jacksonville from where he'd been, and so I got a call pretty late at night on a Saturday night asking me if I would do his sermon. Now, I'm sure there was fax technology and that sort of thing, but like me, Billy was somebody who did not type out his sermons carefully in advance. So I said, sure, I'll do it, but I'll do it my way. And so the next day, this is what I was working toward. The first thing I had to observe is that when we're speaking of failure, I had already failed with respect to our speaker because he'd failed bigger than I had. He didn't even show up. The first rule is to be there, and so I was never going to top that, which took the pressure off, right? Where do we get our definitions of success? So, Bob Dylan said, she knows there's no success like failure, and failure's no success at all. That doesn't make any sense to me. Where do our definitions of success come? They come from society, they come from our parents, from our peers. We kind of grow up with them. And as we grow up, sometimes our notions of what counts as success will evolve, won't they? When you were 10 years old, what did you hope your adult success would be? Can any of you remember that as you think back? I wanted to be a... Well, you were like this, like you remembered something.
Movie star.
A movie star. Worthy goal. Where would we be without such magic? When you were a teen, when you were a young adult, as you think about the different stages of your life and what you looked ahead to, perhaps as human beings we anticipate toward the future, even live into our futures in ways that are distinctive of human beings. And so perhaps we're guided in that by these notions of what our goals might be, what will count as being successful. But perhaps it's changing, perhaps it's a moving target as we grow. I'm sure, like me, some of you have had experiences where you thought this was what you wanted, you started into it, and then it was, take me back, Mr. Wizard. I don't want to be a fill in the blank. Well, how about our opposite term, failure? If we haven't all grown up to be the successes we thought we might be at younger points in our lives, where do our definitions of failure come from? I won't ask you to raise your hands, but silently reflect on this question. How many of you have failed at a job or even an entire career besides Jack and me? How many of you have failed at love or marriage? There are all kinds of ways and domains in our lives that we can fail. And you may know where I'm going with this, but don't jump ahead yet, because I want to stay in that failure, the feeling of failure for a moment. What did your failure feel like? Think of something that at the time really felt like kind of a big failure if you got such a thing. And try to get back into that spirit of what it felt like. I remember when I was denied tenure, for instance, that it was very, very hard to walk into the cafeteria dining room that I'd been in the Friday before I got the letter denying me tenure. that just felt like a whole change in my world. I can remember when my first love left me, and it's the most depressed I've been in my entire life. I was 17 years old. So if you think about that, that uncomfortable feeling, that shook up feeling, that feeling of loss, what many people, very well-intentioned as Paul Simon's lyrics that we just sang for Bridge Over Troubled Waters, like, it will pass. Things will be better. You'll be back on the road to success, maybe even in no time. That's the good advice, right? But sometimes the failure sits so heavy and so hard that you're not ready to go back on a road to anything. I sure wasn't ready to date anybody within months after my first love had left me. I wasn't quite sure about whether I wanted to stay in the field of philosophy after being denied tenure. But when we felt that, when we've been shaken up like that, we might recover, we might build again with a new job, a new love, but have any of you completely rethought what it was you wanted out of that kind of failure? Anybody? So, at least sometimes, one of the possibilities of experiencing failure is that it draws us back to something that is a different reflective space from whoever set the rules for what's going to count as success. And even for the elements that we've projected and thought of as free choice about our own aspirations for success in our lives. The crux, for me, of the Tao of failure is that it takes us to the question of the locus of definition. Psychologists talk about an internal locus of control and an external locus of control. Who's pulling your puppet strings, you or somebody else? Where do our definitions come? Who's pulling the strings of those definitions? Are the definitions that I grew up with absorbed, modified, incorporated in different stylistic ways? Are they fundamentally mine? Or am I vamping on a borrowed riff, which is fine? But if I am, it may be that there are elements of the underlying themes that are still not entirely me, and potentially the root of a conflict between the me as I experience myself and the world in which I hope to be successful. So, thinking back to that locus of definition, to where our standards come from for what we should be, sometimes it's failure that calls us back to the question, as Bonnie Raitt once sung, what is success? What really is success? What really is living well? What do I really want out of life? From the determined, scripted path I may have had on my way to where I thought I was going, a questioning path, perhaps, which might lead to the ultimate questions of philosophy, to the meaning of life, to what matters, to a UU church in Palatka. What I was going to do with my phone, I'm going to try to remember the lyrics so I don't jam everything up. When I was in 8th grade or 9th grade, there was a song by a really clever guy. Ray Stevens did this thing, Guitar's Hand. But he had a song called Mr. Businessman. And I put it on a mixtape, which I happened to hear a few weeks ago, and it just floored me. Because that lyric absolutely captures poetically what I didn't want in my society's definition of success. Itemize the things you covet as you squander through your life. Bigger cars, bigger houses, term insurance for the wife. Tuesday evenings at your harlot, and on Wednesday at your charlatan analyst. He's high up on your list. You've got air-conditioned sinuses and dark, disturbing doubts about religion, and you keep those cards and letters going out. Though your secretary's tempting you, your morals are exempting you from guilt and shame. Heaven knows you're not to blame. 86 proof anesthetic crutches take you to the top, where the smiles are all synthetic and the ulcers never stop. When they reach that final inventory, yours will be the same sad story. And then somehow it gets to no one more lonely than this rich, important man. Let's have your autograph. Endorse your epitaph. So in that time of culture, the notion of take care of business was much in the air. And so the title, Take Care of Business, Mr. Businessman, was the businessman I didn't want to be. Many of us are Unitarian Universalists because we have questioned and even rejected many of the definitions of success that have prevailed in our culture. No matter what age we find ourselves, there's still something in American culture to dissent from. Culture shapes success and failure, not only in America, but in all cultures. Mostly conventionally, and it was the same way when the Tao Te Ching was composed in the time of the decline of feudal states in the Zhou dynasty, in the period sometimes called the Warring States. It had been thought for a long time, as you noted, that the Tao Te Ching was compiled or composed around the 6th century BC. The more current thinking is that it might have been much later, even the 3rd century BC. In any case, it seems to be, in part, a reaction against a number of different schools, including Confucius and also the realists. But the way I think for our purposes we can think about some of that opposition. To take the example of the great, great Chinese intellectual Confucius, who is a pillar of Chinese culture. Society is ordered by roles. Institutions are based on harmonious relationships in an order that allows for the progress of individuals and of society within that, but which maintains an order that I find very analogous to Southern manners. As in, through this mode of decorum, we can go on with life and death, political differences, and whatever race anybody might be in, whether I'm a racist or not, and everything else, we can still have our Southern manners and get on with our lives, right? So in this period of China, there was an emphasis among some thinkers to follow the conventions so that we don't devolve into chaos, anarchy, and the disorder of conflict between individuals, between states, and everything else. A very reasonable way to look at it if you want to maintain order above all. The old master, which is what Lao Tzu means, reacted against that way of looking at the world. For the old master, who may have been one person, but may well not have been, the real Te, the word Te in Tao Te Ching, the real Te, virtue, is not something conventional. The virtue around which our lives are best lived is not by convention, but by nature. In a way, the fundamental thing about everything Taoist is that it takes as its model nature. That can be the nature as in the water, the stone, the waterfall, the wind, the nature as in my nature, within human nature, within the nature that sustains us as human beings. All of this is natural. And so the Taoist perspective, whether it's old, new, or the Tao of something, the Taoist perspective is to follow nature, to act naturally, as Ringo once sang. In following nature, then, what would count as success for water? A successful water drop would do what? It would obey gravity. That's what a successful water drop would do. It would fall, drift, float, swim. It would not, however, engage in a fundraising activity to go upstream. Because water flows, and it flows to what the low places are. Because of that, the Tao says that water, by following its way, will wear away the hardest stone. Water will fill the lowest places, and from that, everything will grow. Everything issues from that. Why? Because that's the nature. And so we too have a nature, and our nature isn't necessarily to be contracting individuals in a social state with free will and egos and all the rights of property that attach to that under law. That's not the nature way of approaching what is. What I want to do is I want to go through several verses from the Tao Te Ching to give you from the natural horse's mouth some sense of it, building on what Carol so beautifully put this morning. This is chapter 2 of the Tao Te Ching. Flow downhill, water. It is because everyone under heaven recognizes beauty as beauty that the idea of ugliness exists. And equally, if everyone recognized virtue as virtue, this would merely create fresh conceptions of wickedness. For truly being and not being grow out of one another. Difficult and easy complete one another, long and short test one another. High and low determine one another, pitch and mode give harmony to one another. Front and back give sequence to one another. Therefore, the sage relies on actionless activity, wu wei, carries on wordless teaching, but the myriad creatures are worked upon by him. He does not disown them. He rears them, but does not lay claim to them, controls them, but does not lean upon them, achieves his aim, but does not call attention to what he does. And for the very reason that he does not call attention to what he does, he is not ejected from fruition of what he has done. If nobody knew who I was, I might have gotten tender. Compare success and failure. There can be no failure without some measure of success against which failure fails. Success is like the high. Failure is like the low. Is water successful or not? Well, it succeeds at being what it is. It succeeds in its nature. It is what it is. It is water, and it occupies the low. And so, just in our vertical measures of scaling and evaluating these things, we might think of water as failing in that context. But what is low is what is most valued in that sense by the Tao Te Ching. Taoism inverts our conventional values. It affirms the low over the high, the female over the male, the yielding over the active. All of these being part of that yin and yang that was already so integral to the Chinese way of thought in their great wise dynastic years. Let me share another verse about that. Chapter 8. The highest good is like that of water. The goodness of water is that it benefits the 10,000 creatures, yet itself does not scramble, but is content with the places that all men disdain. It is this that makes water so near to the way. And if men think the ground the best place for building a house, if among thoughts they value those that are profound, in friendship they value gentleness, in words truth, in government good order, in deeds effectiveness, in each case it's because they prefer what does not lead to strife, and therefore does not go amiss. So here in the Tao Te Ching, they're linking the notion that water, by finding its own place, is in accordance with nature and therefore not in strife. It may disdain the places that we think, oh, that's the high ground, the level, build on that, it's not swampy, but by being its own place, then there's no contest over it. I used the analogy in the blurb for this sermon of the gnarled tree that no lumberjack is going to want to cut down. There'd be a lot of artists hanging around, but the tree will survive the lumber company. Zhuangzi is another Taoist who was sometime after the composition of the Tao Te Ching. And Zhuangzi sometimes has a kind of biting humor that's delightful. But I want to read you a piece from him from a chapter called The Great Knowledge. Pleasure and rage, sadness and joy, hopes and regrets, change and stability, weakness and decision, impatience and sloth, all are sounds from the same flute, all mushrooms from the same wet mold. Day and night follow one another and come upon us without our seeing how they sprout. Enough, enough! Early and late we meet that from which these all grow. If there were no that, there would be no this. If there were no this, there would be nothing for all these winds to play on. So far can we go, but how shall we understand what brings it about? One may well suppose the true governor to be behind it all. That such a power works, I can believe. I cannot see his form. He acts, but has no form. And so Zhuangzi is playing on the literature of the government of a kingdom, but clearly the he there is a made-up attribution of gender. He's not speaking of an 18th century deist God who's organized the universe this way. He's speaking of the formless from which all form emerges. The way, the source, just like that from which the water springs to the naked eye, being beneath our sight, beyond our reach perhaps. The failed tree will not be cut because it's useless. We want to be the strongest, the stoutest, and the highest. But that's the tree, even the greatest timber, that gets cut down. Except when John Muir and other great souls can step in and save them, right? Let me read from verse 22 in the Tao Te Ching. Just keep stand with those words a little bit. A sense of paradox here. To remain whole, be twisted. To become straight, let yourself be bent. To be full, be hollow. Be tattered, that you may be renewed. Those that have little may get more. Those that have much are but perplexed. Therefore the sage clasps the primal unity, testing it by everything under heaven. He does not show himself, therefore he's seen everywhere. Does not define himself, therefore he is distinct. Does not boast of what he will do, and therefore succeeds. He is not proud of his work, and therefore it endures. And for that very reason, no one under heaven can contend with him. Let's see. One more, verse 31, verse 41. Which is going to take me just a minute because I forgot to mark the tab on that one. 40. I don't need LX, what I need XL. That's what I need. Yes, thank you, Roman numerals. 41. Oh, it did have it. When the man of highest capacities hears Tao, he does his best to put it into practice. When the man of middling capacity hears Tao, he is in two minds about it. When the man of low capacity hears Tao, he laughs loudly at it. If he did not laugh, it would be not worth the name of Tao. Therefore the proverb has it, the way out into the light often looks dark. The way that goes ahead often looks as if it went back. The power that is loftiest looks like an abyss. What is sheerest white looks blurred. The power that is most sufficing looks inadequate. The power that stands firmest looks flimsy. What is in its natural pure state looks faded. The largest square has no corners. Great music has the faintest note. The greatest vessel takes the longest to finish. The great form is without shape. For Tao is hidden and nameless, yet Tao alone supports all things and brings them to their fulfillment. So, in that sense of the fulfillment, the hard and the soft, when we are born, we are soft and weak. In death, we are stiff and hard. The Tao, then, is the spirit of life. If we measure success as society does, the Tao, in a way, says, turn away from that. Pay no attention to that. Seek the low, yield. As Unitarian Universalists, we may define our own pathways of success more creatively, but I think in doing that we may draw implicitly on these Taoist perspectives. I think for those of us who do strive, you know that symbol that's sometimes shown with that yin and yang? And each has the seed of the other inside it, the blue and the green and the blue, the black and the white and the black. I think many of us as Unitarian Universalists, when we are striving, we have a conscious seed of passive attention, even when we're active. The Taoist phrase, wu wei, or actionless activity, does not suggest that we should be passive, does not suggest that we should be still. What wu wei, actionless activity, indicates is that even in our actions, there's a stillness at the heart of that, like the seed of the yin, the passive principle, the yielding principle within the yang, the active principle. So as we make our choices about how we're striving, in that moment of actionless activity, at best we may flow as the water does, in accordance with our own natures. When none of the doors that you push open, what can you do? One answer is to see if they open toward you rather than pushing on them. Some doors one yields to rather than pushing at, as in life. Maybe one of them opens in and not out. We don't push the river. Striving can be its own obstacle. As a matter of fact, in clinical reading that I've done, I find that resistance can feed the very symptoms, syndromes, whatever you want to call them, that we're trying to overcome. That the very act of resistance, a la Jesus or Martin Luther King or others, the very act of resisting in a certain way at the level of where that is, can be counterproductive. Just as we're inspired by great success, I propose we can be inspired by great failure. Michael Jordan was on his junior varsity team in high school as a basketball player. Albert Einstein was barely passing math when he was a schoolboy. I love these examples because they indicate that the ways we measure what somebody's good at and what they're capable of doing are, in at least great cases, greatly wrong. Just as we can be inspired by great failure and look at those things, I would like to be a role model of failure. I was denied, I used the tenure thing, I had lots of great failures, but that one's public, and it's kind of cool because I like to say, I have plans for that failure. I hope that I'm able to do something bucket listy before I'm dead that will be such that I couldn't have done that if I'd gotten tenure where I was denied it. If I had been cultivated to grow in those fields, I would not have gone the wild not so much ivy as watermelon kinds of kudzu paths that I followed. So I have plans for my failure. I would like to be a role model of great failure for other people, and I want to add a chapter to that that I could not have given before. I have to end with the one I had then because it was so, so good. I reached a point where I lost my teaching career, the next thing didn't work, the next thing didn't work, and so I applied for a job selling shoes at Dillard's. And I did that because I was married, I had a daughter, and I had told my wife that this internet thing I'm trying to do doesn't work out. By such and such a time, I'll just go get some kind of job. I did a great interview with Dillard's. They just wanted me to sell shoes for them for some reason. And you know, I was born to sell shoes. That's what I should have been. I could have been a contender. So they were going to hire me. I go to this thing where all I need to do is fill out some paperwork. And they say, where's your Social Security card? And I said, well, Social Security cards are not a legal form of identification, or at least weren't when they were issued. However, I know you have a list of A and a list of B. I have my driver's license. I brought my birth certificate and my marriage certificate. I got columns A and B. No, we need your Social Security card. Are you nuts? What do you... No, we need your Social Security card. Well, when's the next time I can do this? 2 months? Or something like, maybe it was 1 month, something like that. Are you nuts? I can't get a job selling shoes because I don't have my Social Security card, only my driver's license, my birth certificate, and my marriage license. Okay. So right after that, something different happened. I had a different career that I couldn't possibly have had at that point in time if I'd stayed at Dillard's, if I'd gone to Dillard's and sold shoes. That was a great failure. I knew somebody who was doing interviews for a pilot project for, they were doing assessments in the jail for a project that was going to work with people who had substance use problems. After they'd filled that and closed the deadline, put in a call, oh, we can add you. And that became the beginning of my behavioral health career, which has carried into this century and did the unsatisfying work and partly satisfying work that I've failed at ever since. Which brings me to the newest chapter in my inspirational tale of failure. I mentioned in a sermon a few months ago that I was really struggling with some things in my job, helping persons who have mental health issues and are either experiencing or at risk of homelessness apply for disability benefits with Social Security. I said, I've become convinced that the people who make those decisions, I don't want to impute anything to them, but I want to say they're not acting like they know what the rules are. Let's put it that way. So I was like, if I can't navigate this, I'm going to have to find a different job. Well, the universe heard that loud and clear. And I really didn't have a whole, I was trying some worthy things, but what happened was my entire agency shut down. What happened within the space of a few days is I have a meeting I'm preparing for with my CEO, so I'm calling to get one more active person on my caseload. I end up calling to a place, I find out, you know, there's a job open, you should apply for it. It's doing what you do, and it would be the Jacksonville Reentry Center. Well, that's cool. So the next day I call a friend of mine who isn't going to apply for that job. He'd worked there before. So I said, okay. I call my references. I get the application in. Monday, my boss says, basically, I got to fire you. So I negotiate for, well, let me give you 4 weeks notice, and that way we can do it all on the best terms. You can have the billing between now and then, everything else. Before that time could be up, the board voted to dissolve the company because they'd run out of money. Boy, that sounds interesting, doesn't it? Wait till you hear chapter 2. 2 days after my last day of work, I had a job interview at the other place, doing the same thing in a different context. It was great. They wanted me. If you had asked me when I was young whether I thought I would ever work for the sheriff's office, I said, what? You know, as a songwriter or what? I mean, so I have this job offer pending all the HR stuff. I fill out all the paperwork. I go in there. I don't want to sound too much like Arlo Guthrie, but there was a list of 200 questions or something. And they said, yeah, we're going to give you a polygraph test. And it's all right if there's some things you did in the past, because everybody's done some things in the past, but yeah, if your body says you're lying, you're out of here. So what do you think I did? Take a guess what I did.
You lied on purpose.
How many people think I lied on purpose and got caught? How many people think I told the truth? I told the truth, and before they even got around to a polygraph test. I mean, I was on my way home from dropping the UA for the drug stuff. Now, I'm removed from the hiring process due to information obtained in the screening process. So, you young people in the back, do not ever take LSD when you're 17 years old or anything like that. Not only could you be an acid casualty, it could mean for the rest of your life you could never work for the sheriff's department. Those of you who are a little bit older, we won't go into entertainment violations or anything like that, but in any case, I told the truth, and I am not a sheriff's office employee. This is my latest gospel of failure. And so what I decided to do, because I'm not going to write a book on success, I don't think the Tao of Failure is quite a book. I've got a book I'm working on, and I've been really struggling to get that thing done. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take up to about 2 months. I'm going to finish the proposal for the book, which I've been struggling with. When I finish this proposal and I start sending it out to agents, the book is on its way. I can write the book. The book is 2/3 of the way written anyway. It's this kind of stuff, you know, it's drawn on sermons that I've given over the years. So my current failure seems to me just the right reason to take a sabbatical, to do this one thing that's been bugging me and do it right, and then take a whole fresh look at what might count as something like success. Because I've only got a few months before I turn 65, and Lord knows you've got to do something before you retire.